Good morning. Shall we start? You guys getting mentally ready for lecture? How's everybody doing? Happy long weekend? I hope you enjoyed your long weekend. Here we are. For what it's worth, I'm here with you, right? Yes, I will bounce early today, but usually I would have stayed. I just have family in town, so I have to see them to the airport and things like that, but I would have stayed the whole day with you. You know, suffer together, right? Um, Hopefully you had a good at least 2 days of weekend in terms of some downtime, some of that rest that we talked about on day one. No, did not have a good weekend? Oh, same? Oh, you were doing like 8-hour days plus Saturday. Oh, wow. Well, I commend you. I commend you. Um, Hopefully that time was productive, though. Hopefully you felt good about it. But if not, we can talk about that. Um, yeah, it's definitely intense, right? Yeah. um, Today we'll do a lot of conversation about kind of the stuff that was covered on the weekend. So automated testing is a big topic that you may have noticed on the weekend. So some of the lecture will be review and kind of solidifying that stuff. Remember in the first week I talked about getting you to do some exercises and then having a lecture on it is the most ideal approach. So hopefully you'll find that resonates with this lecture. Um, I don't have a joke to start off with, I just realized. So we'll skip that, maybe next time. Does anybody have a joke they want to share? No? No quick ones, like no knock-knock jokes or anything that are programming related? Nothing? Okay. Um, First of all, what is this week about? Yes, today is about automated testing and wrapping up Lowtide, your Lodash clone. And just kind of getting that out of the way, getting that done. And then starting tomorrow and for the next 3 days, so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we'll really be focused on another fundamental concept of programming, especially in JavaScript, but in general, which is async programming, as you might have read in Compass, right? So really dealing with slow code. How do I deal with things that are like sending messages across the internet or reading from disk? These things take time. How does Node deal with it? And what does that mean to me as a developer when working with JavaScript, whether it's in the browser, because there's a lot of things that are slow in the browser, right? Like we don't know when the user is going to click on a button. How do we deal with that thing, right? And so a lot of stuff we'll be doing, although we won't be coding in the browser this week at all, we'll be doing a lot of things that are going to help us with that come browser time. It's going to be fun, I think. But it'll be intense. We'll be continuing to do some automated testing for the remainder of the week, but it'll be difficult. So, you know, there'll be like, there was a lot of automated testing last week, I would argue, like with assert, equal, and things of that nature. And then we're kind of getting a little bit more mature with it as of the weekend / today, right? And then there'll be some of it in the week, but not as much as I would like. And that's just the necessary evil of too many things, right? Too many things to cover. But a lot of it actually also I want to talk about today as a review, because I think it's easily forgotten, even by seasoned developers, let alone new developers, is this idea of like, what does it mean to be a developer? Like, what are some of the most important things that KVI should be focusing on while I'm here? And really like worrying most about instead of my completion, right? My assignment completion and things of that nature. Of course, those are things I need to worry about, but what's the reason I'm worrying about that? And what should I, you know, how should I approach a lot of the learnings that I have? So on that subject, what do you guys think? What do you think should be kind of the main focuses that you ought to have, that you should be reminded of with having done a week now? Congratulations, by the way, having done a week or thereabouts. What do you think your kind of opinions are around what it means to be a developer? I know it hasn't been long, but what do you think? Renee? Yeah, results matter, of course. Well, by the way, my S key sucks today. Results matter. And taking a step back when stuck. Things like asking for help or even just rubber ducking and things of that nature are good practice, right? So yeah, absolutely. Great answer from Renee, yeah. Yeah, either looking back at your own code or when somebody else looks at your code or when you're looking at an instructor's code from a lecture notes, having comments really helps provide context so that the goal is to synthesize that stuff sooner rather than later, right? So yeah, that's a really, really good answer. Remind me your name? Grayson, thanks. Come on, there's got to be other stuff, right? James, you have anything? I mean, in order to answer the question about what it means to be a developer, we should probably ask also the question of what's it all for? And what's the most important kind of, what are we writing all of these things for? Why do we have modules? Why do we have NPM? Why do we have functions? Why do we have all of these things, right? If we answer that, then maybe some other stuff can come out of it, yeah.
Proxy between, let's say, someone's desires or needs to accomplish something that can offload the work onto something else. Like
yeah, that's a good point.
We're
yeah.
taking a problem that a user has that they do all the time or can't do, and we make it possible or easier, which liberates them from having to do it. And we have to navigate the choices of what is best or most realistic to accomplishing that within the restraints that we have.
Really well answered. So at the very highest level of that hierarchy, you're kind of seeing, well, yeah, software, great, but really what's it all for? It's for humans, it's for people, right? And specifically, it's about helping them solve a specific problem, but through automation or through kind of deferring and speeding up their solution, right? I love that. And so what our role is to kind of help craft the solutions for that, right? So the sooner we get the solutions built, the better the solutions are, the better it is for our end users. So everything we're doing is really about solving problems for people versus solving problems for, I don't know, machines or something like that, right? And in fact, in people, I would actually say there's a separation. There's solving problems for users who are going to use the software. And then slightly lower than that is solving problems for other developers, including ourselves, so that we can then, because we are the proxy, solve those problems faster or better, right? So we see things like Mocha and Chai and other libraries that we're using that are not really meant for end users, right? Like the end user doesn't give any hoots about Mocha and Chai. They don't care about whether or not your code is tested or not. But we care about that, even though our main mission is really to solve problems for end users. How does that reconcile? How does that reconcile is the next question. So ultimately, under end users, what's our other big kind of bucket? We say other developers, but why? Or how, rather, I should say. How for other developers, right? And so if we look at things, again, like this libraries that I've mentioned, or these functionalities that are in most languages, the idea of modules is in most languages, whether it's Ruby, Python, Java, whatever, right? These things exist because ultimately our biggest challenge is wrangling code. The complexity that comes from real-world applications that you have yet to see because you're dealing with tens of lines of code, well, it's not even hundreds, it's tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions of lines of code. We're humans. Computers don't care if it's all in one file or all on one line even, right? They don't care about how maintainable your code is. The computer's just going to run the instructions, and as long as it's accurate, it's going to do the output. So why do we put so much effort into linting and modularizing our code and function best practices? Why do we do that? We don't do that for the end user either, do we? Not directly. So we do that for ourselves or other developers on the team so that we can move fast and move well and not break things along the way. Because if we don't have testing and if we haven't written our code well, as the software ages, it's going to be harder to add features without breaking some other feature. Right? We'll see that with testing. So I think those are important. And another thing that kind of falls underneath that, maybe level 3 for me, is the approach. A lot of developers, especially as you're learning, get too caught up in the most ideal way to solve this. Should this be an if statement, if else, or should it be a ternary? You know, should I, instead of using a for loop, can I use a map? These are cool things to learn, but I wouldn't get caught up in it right now. What I really want you to focus on is how you're approaching thinking about and crafting your solutions. I would even argue that like the most clean, best practices of functions, they're important, but how you're actually writing your code and how you're thinking, your mental framework, is the most important. And then you'll be able to slowly get good at certain kind of like, oh, like I got burnt by doing a function that does too many things, and I'll eventually kind of, I know that KB talked about it and people talked about it, but I'm still doing that a year in sometimes, and then kind of improve on those things, right? But don't get too worked up if you're not writing the most optimal code or not getting all the solutions. So what do I mean by approach? For me, a big, big, big thing is approach. So for me, it's approach, approach, approach. Like the mental framework, the mental model. How do I actually write code? So I'm going to spend a little bit of time, before we get into Mocha and Chai and TDD, I'm going to talk a little bit about, even just without those things, if you didn't have those tools and you're writing something really small and you don't care about using them, what kind of approach things can you take? So what we're going to do is we're going to do a live demo, which really focuses not on the solution, because it'll be a very simple function, and really like how I would suggest that you approach that function or something of that nature. And everything, ultimately, you're working in small increments. So you could argue that you could apply this to bigger solutions, right? So we're going to use a quick demo. We're going to code together, hopefully, to really talk about error-driven development, which is something I talk about quite a bit. I don't think I've talked about it with your cohort yet, not in our previous lecture. Has it come up by Travis or other people? Has error-driven development something that isn't really if you Google it, like nobody talks about it in these terms. But to me, this is really important, and it's actually the crux of TDD. Right? So error-driven development plus Mocha and Chai becomes TDD. But I want to talk about it without Mocha and Chai first. So what the hell is error-driven development? Again, it's about that approach, and in this case, the approach is to embrace and actually leverage errors. Not what I believe most of you are treating errors like. I bet most of you, based on just how we are trained in other fields, when you see an error on the screen of code that you've written, first of all, you're scared to see an error on the screen. And then when you see it, you kind of have this like subconscious or conscious kind of like, you know, like negative, ugh. Am I right? And so that actually makes you like nervous to even hit enter or run on your code until you feel like it's perfect. And then you want to hit enter or near perfect in order to avoid as many of that kind of gut negative reaction. Is that a fair assumption? This is not your fault, but I want you to start shifting this mindset. It's not your fault because that's kind of how we've been trained. When we see red, when we see errors on a screen as a user, it's considered a bad thing. We're trained actually by society to avoid errors, to avoid those kind of problems. Is that a fair statement as well? Developers, good developers in my opinion, one breed of good developer actually leverages errors and has trained themselves to actually intentionally cause errors and use them as a way to write their code. Errors as a way of writing your code is error-driven development. That's a fair term. I don't think I coined it, but I thought I did until I Googled it. And there's like one other person that's written about it. Okay? But it is also the premise behind TDD. So it's not like this is just something that isn't really valuable in the long run. Okay? So remember that I'm going to leverage errors as much as possible for many reasons, but one of them is actually to learn about errors. If I'm coding in a new language, I want to know what the errors look like, right? Think about that. Instead of them surprising me, I'm causing errors and learning about them intentionally. That's cool. And then B, you know what's worse than not seeing than seeing errors is not seeing errors and stuff still not working, because then it's harder to debug, right? You can relate to this, some of you, right? Like, oh, I don't see any errors, but like nothing is happening. this is great. Like now I'm gonna have to like do more work to figure out where this problem is versus an error that's at least giving me some direction. Not always, but some direction. Right? So why don't I use that to my advantage? Right? So that's my kind of big if there's one thing I want you to take away from this bootcamp, right, is really this focus on approach and trying your best. And you're not gonna do it 100% of the time, just like I don't 100% of the time do error-driven development or TDD, right? This is not a binary yes or no. This is a how much of this you do. And I hope that you will do some of it during and after bootcamp to help your learning and your productivity. So while it may seem like the solution that I'm going to write for this function that I've written here, abbreviating names, I just came up with it before lecture. Just wanted to come up with a simple function. Really, again, it's about not the solution, the approach, right? So it's going to seem like I'm taking long to solve this, but it's actually going to save me time. It's also because I'm lecturing as I'm going, right? So let's actually go with it. So let me ask you a trick question. How do I start writing this function? How do I start, if I'm given an assignment or it's part of my app that I need to create this function, and this is my directory right here. There's nothing in it. How do I start? Lots of hands go up. We'll talk with you. I think your name is Brian. Nice. Write the tests. I have no files. Yeah, actually, I would argue even before that, there's something you could do. You could actually, this is going a little extreme, and I'm being a little bit dogmatic intentionally. I don't have a file. I would normally run a file. What happens if I try to run a file that doesn't exist? Right? Like, this is my first time. I want to see that error. Right? Like, even try to just be like, what is an error that I can cause? And then how would I fix that error? And Travis talked about incremental development on your first technical lecture last week. Right? And then we kind of left it, and we hoped that you did incremental. Of course, the activities try to get you to do incremental. But like, error-driven development is all about incrementally building, right? So we're going to cause an error, and then we're going to fix that error. So the first error that I can cause is, I have no file. I want to run a file that has this function. That could be a test in of itself. I don't need to start writing, and I'm not going to write automated tests, by the way. Right? I'm not going to write Mocha Chai tests. I'm not going to write assert equal. I'm going to just keep it like really simple for this particular demo, right? Just to show that it has nothing to do with, error-driven development has nothing to do with writing automated tests. It's just causing errors and using them to your advantage. Now, you would do that with tests. You could do that with anything, right? OK, so I would have a file ideally that's called node, I don't know, index.js. Index.js would be my file, perhaps, right? Well, I don't have it, and I know I don't have it. And now I'm going to have a hypothesis about what's going to happen when I run this. This is obviously happening all very quickly in my head, right? So what do you think the error will be of doing this? File does not exist would be my guess. In fact, that is not the error that you get. It talks about modules. Now, you may be like, I don't know what modules are. I'm learning this for the first time. That's interesting. You could even go down that rabbit hole right off the bat, right? What does that mean? Why? But maybe some rabbit holes are better explored later, right? But that's interesting. Like, we just learned something that even right now, after a week in, you didn't know the exact error here. Interesting. OK, so let's create that file. In order to, my hypothesis that if I create this file and then run that again, I will have incrementally solved that error. Agreed? So I'm going to create the file, and then I'm going to run it. Great. And I had a hypothesis that it would always have a hypothesis as well. Like, this is what I think will happen. It's OK to be wrong. That's the other gut feeling that's kind of negative right now for you. It's OK to be wrong on that stuff because you're learning, right? Is this useful? Like, I haven't written a single line of code. Is this useful? This approach, hopefully? We'll find out more soon. OK, so no error. That's great. Now I have this file. I'm going to open it. And I'm going to need a function that is going to maybe take some parameters like first name, last name. And it's going to kind of concatenate them in a clever way, right? That's what kind of the, and I haven't really fully defined it because I don't care that much about that. And we can kind of evolve it over time, perhaps. But what do I do next? Trick question again. Write the function expression. Would that cause an error? No. I want to cause an error first. Yeah. Call the function. Call a function that doesn't exist and expect it to fail. So I hate how VS Code. OK, there we go. Let's assume a name for that function will be, did we give a name in the definition? Abbreviate name, perhaps? Something like that? So abbreviate name. And we'll just pass in Kuram Virani, because I'm not feeling very creative today, as usual. So abbreviate name. What do I expect will happen when I run this? What do I expect will happen? Anshik? Of course. Maybe there's a better way. Actually, whatever, I'm too lazy. Here you go. There'll be an error, I think. Yeah. And you don't need to give me the exact sentence of the error. You can give me a undefined function. Yeah, I think something like that. Oops. My S key is not working very well, remember? Man. Oh, and by the way, even just that whole missing the save thing, I caught that very early, didn't I? Right? Like there's a small little like, don't assume that things are working until you make sure. So anyway, abbreviate name is not defined, as you mentioned. Good call. Okay, now what? I have to fix this error and this error alone, nothing else. Okay, that's the other rule of error-driven development. So what do I do to fix this error? Yeah. Define the function. I don't even need it to take parameters for this error to go away. At least in JavaScript. In Ruby, it would be like, no, still an error, different error. But that would be OK, too, because we want that error to go away. We don't necessarily want all errors to go away. That's another important rule of iterative error-based development. It's not about making all errors go away and being like, oh, I know there's going to be this error and that error. Don't make those assumptions right now. If you want to be dogmatic about it, just make the current error go away. Yeah.
Yeah, but couldn't, like in some circumstances, when you're resolving one error, you could potentially like resolve it, but not actually resolve it. Like, shouldn't you like when you're resolving it, yes, resolve it, but also put in something to assure that it's
A step in the right direction.
yes.
Yeah, you definitely want to use your human intuition to make sure you're stepping in the right direction. But this is actually a really, really good question around like, don't you want to be still a little bit more careful about not just being too short-sighted isn't good, just like being too much focused on the end result isn't good either, because you're not focusing on how to get there, right? That's kind of your point. Is neither extreme is good. I totally agree. But this is also a good talking point about something else I like to say when I introduce EDD, or iterative development generally. You would think that the fastest point from A to B, A being like, I have no lines of code written, to B being, or let's call it Z, is actually like everything solved just like we want, is a straight line. That's what we've taught, right? Like straight line, shortest path. I didn't have my whiteboard with me, but just visualize it on my hands, okay? This is what we try to do, and what I see this manifested as developers is writing a bunch of code that's exactly in the right direction. Kind of taking that approach of like, I don't want to write things that are actually away from the solution. I would actually argue that the shortest path is not the straight line. It's actually a zigzag that goes like this, that if you draw it on a whiteboard, it looks like much more distance. And I'm going to try and illustrate that a little bit here with this function as well. I'm actually going to go a step away from the solution in order to do incremental development, which is going to be lines of code that I'm going to like throw away later. Not just console log, but like actually inaccurate implementation, but they'll help me go faster. Strange, I know. And that's kind of the incremental development philosophy, that at least how I visualize it in my head. So this will hopefully make the error go away, but my question should also be, what do I expect to see next? So this is also a good learning opportunity. What do I expect to see next? Somebody who hasn't answered yet? And Nancy, you want to take a shot at this? What do I expect to see happen? Hopefully that error will go away because the function is defined now. But what will be the next error or thing that I see on the screen? I have a function, actually. OK, so that's a different thing, though. OK, so what do you expect to see? Error, this function does nothing. Is that a thing? OK, so what do you expect to see? Take a guess. It's OK to be wrong. Just whatever comes to mind. I run node index.js. What do I expect to see approximately? So no errors here, I don't think, in terms of syntax, unless I made a mistake there. And then a function being called, which is defined right there. So not returning anything which implicitly returns undefined. And I'm not console logging anything. Now the only possible error is like I'm passing an argument here, and there's no arguments being accepted here. But we know that JavaScript doesn't care about that. So in other languages that would be an error, but in this language, no output because no console log statements, and no errors either. Right? So I've kind of solved that error incrementally. Now, this is an example of me not really fully going into the direction of the solution, right? I need to fix this still. But there'll be other examples of that kind as well. So what next? Yeah. Add an input parameter and return the same parameter. Will that cause an error? But that's my first question. If I'm doing EDD dogmatically, my first question is my next step going to cause an error? Sometimes it's not possible, like in the next step that you have to do. But in this case, I think I can think of something that will cause an error. You have to think about like what you need and then actually using it before you actually define it. Yep. Yeah. Like maybe I assume that the argument is being received. So I would return. And there's supposed to be two names passed in, so I think I made a mistake there, actually, unintentionally. So it actually should be Kuram Virani, like that. And then I'm gonna return, just first name, right? Because there's supposed to be two arguments going into here. Oh no, is there? I forget what I actually wrote. Just one, right? So it's just going to be, it's what it was there before, just the one. So return full name maybe is the thing that comes in, right? And I expect that to give me an error, and I expect to do something about a missing variable name. Do you have a question or a comment, Renee? I'm actually looking for both, but in this case, it's the question is logical or syntax errors. The next error that makes sense to you, it could be of any kind. Yeah, it's a good point. Logical error as well. Like an error doesn't have to be, it's a really good point, and I was going to get to this. Error doesn't have to be that you see error on the screen. It could be, I now need to see this, but it's not happening. How do I get to that point? That's an error too, right? Okay, so in this case, though, it's a reference error, trying to reference something that does not exist. In this case, a local variable full name is not defined. I'm going to fix that next. And this is kind of helping me build to my solution. And it may seem a little bit, oops, forgot to create a hypothesis there that it would be, it would not output something because we haven't console logged anything yet, right? And so my error condition now is actually what you were talking about, logical. I can't, the fact that I don't have anything on the screen to me is an error. I want to be able to see what the function is doing. That's my error condition, right? So I'm going to just solve that. I want to see what the function is returning. I'm going to solve that. So it's not like we actually, yes, we solved the previous error of full name not defined, but now we have another error, which is I don't see anything, right? So we're going to console log with S's in the right place in order to see what this looks like. Okay. So that now I expect that error to go away, which is I expect to see something come back. This is not a step in the solution, though, is it? I don't want to be returning the full name. This is my example of like going a little bit off that straight line in order to work incrementally and actually avoid larger errors later. So what's now? What's next?
You're doing the modified name, like I can't remember what the deliverable was. Was it
like I need to turn
first name and then like the initial of the last name?
I think it's like first initial last name.
Okay, yeah. So let's throw the initial up because you're going to be taking. You can either create a variable for the initial or you can add it too. But let's throw just the initial.
Just the initial of the first name. Yeah, sure. So I guess it would be something like, instead of full name, I actually want to see the first initial. I'm going to run that, expect an error, because first initial is not a thing. And then I'm going to say I need to define first initial, right? And it needs to be K dot, I believe. that right? So I'm going to say, I'm going to solve it to be k dot, correct? So I'm going to do this. Not a path towards a solution, but actually solving my current need. Again, this is dogmatic EDD. You can skip some of these steps, but like if I'm doing dogmatic TDD, dogmatic EDD, this is the kind of stuff that you do. What do I expect now? I expect it to do with k dot, right? But the problem is, if I have another name, right, it's not really going to work, right? What's another name I could use? Why am I struggling with names? Bob Saget? Is that how you spell his name? Or Larry the Duck, for that matter. Yeah, so in that case, I'm going to get Command S. I'm going to get it not working. So now my next error state is it's not actually the right first initial. It's just hard-coded to be k dot. Don't do this for your programming tests, please. So I need to actually make this work now. And I'm going to start going from there, right? So full name, I need to break that down into first initial, right? So what's something I could do now? Yeah.
You could just put the parentheses in the string, just like do it like as an array. So you would do in the form of like square brackets and then the first index.
Yeah.
And just the dot at the end of it.
Yeah, good point. So I could take, my issue is that I need it to be k and then b. Maybe I try to solve that with full name 0, which is the first thing, and then I need to make sure that it actually has a dot in front of it, which currently it doesn't, but I'm working incrementally, so I'm okay with that error condition. Error condition here is no dot. And then I'm going to, maybe first initial, it's okay to keep it as just k, and then in the return, we're going to pass in a dot after the first initial, using a template literal there, template string. Once I hit save, that will work, right? It's like the worst key to not be working. It's like literally my fingers are all the time because I'm constantly hitting Command S. Okay, so a step in the right direction, I think, maybe. What's next? Solve that problem. Next problem is that the last name is not really showing up, right? So it would be something like, I need this to be, after this, it needs to be last name, like that, right? And that's my next error condition. Last name is not defined, so I need to define that now. Right? See what I'm doing here? Trying to go a little bit faster because I think the point has been made. Yep, question from James?
So you get to a point where like you have to make a decision of are your problems going to get more complex later on to prevent now? In the sense of like, so you're taking in, let's say, a string. You have to make sure you take in a string. Or should you be like trying to focus on preventing?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah.
So, like,
your mind can easily race to like, oh, but this can happen or that can happen, right? And that happens to me all the time.
So what I'm saying is like, if you started like before you transition to, let's say, the second part of the name, you deal with the potential errors for the first one first, right? Or would you add that to being later? Like you could have easily replicated that to the
Yeah, in fact, there's another condition I need to handle, which is already mentioned in the question, which is that if I just pass in a single name, then it shouldn't actually abbreviate the first name. It should assume that's the first name. Right? You see this other case? Like there's other conditions that we need to handle that you may not even have been given. You may have to come up with, conjure, or ask about. Like, oh, somebody who defined this requirement to me didn't think about this. I need to ask them a question. And whenever that thought becomes how I approach this, everybody has a different answer. I write that down and don't worry about it in the moment. So I actually have like my notebook. I personally like physical, but sometimes it depends on my mood actually. Sometimes I'll do it in a text file, like just create a new temporary file. And then I'll actually turn that into GitHub issues or whatever that is to have those conversations. I don't know if that answered your full question. Yeah, okay. I forgot to repeat the question, but hopefully you guys got that. Yeah.
What if a question
That's okay. No, the reason, so for usually an edge case, first of all, it's rare. An edge case or something else, like a new requirement, doesn't completely change the things that you're implementing right now. Given this input, it needs to still output that. Yeah, your implementation might be a little bit different at the end result, right? But if you're actually writing, this is where TDD becomes useful. If you're actually writing automated tests for each of those things that you implemented, the reason we're writing tests is that we can change the internals and still be confident that things are working instead of having to like manually test everything over and over again. So a big part of TDD, and I don't, by the end of today, or even by the end of boot camp, I don't expect you to be like, I know TDD and I can do TDD. I still don't feel comfortable with TDD, and some people will call me a senior dev. There are many like me. So it'll take time. But anyway, if you look at the TDD kind of documentation, they say red, green, refactor. Red is failing test. Green is passing test, as we see with Mocha, right? You've probably seen that on the weekend. And then refactor is the next step, even at the increment level. So you write something and then you refactor. For example, even what we wrote here might not be the most optimal solution. You saw me go hard code to Virani, then I'm going to refactor that. Now, ideally, I've written a test, and therefore I'm able to refactor with ease, right? Does that answer your concern? Yeah. So I've got Virani showing up, but I don't want just Virani because I need the actual last name. So now I'm going to be needing to split this into two, right? So I'll do something like, so my error condition is that Virani is being associated all the time. And instead it needs to be the name from full name, right? So it's really going to be, I need to somehow get last name from the split version of full name. And then the second item from there, right? So that's my thing that I need. That's not going to work. I need full name split to be defined. Notice that I'm actually writing variables that maybe I don't need, but I'm going to write them anyway, and then I can refactor that later, assuming especially that I've got testing in place. I think that's how you do it. So now I've got my last name. The error should go away, and I should see it be the last name coming in as a second word from that sentence, from that phrase. Okay, getting somewhere. I don't have an error condition. Both my things are passing. My requirements are met. Actually, my requirements are not met because I haven't really, I wrote this down that I need to be able to handle this, but I haven't handled this yet. So that might be the next error condition that I create. And in doing so, you'll notice that actually I've made some assumptions about the full name being two words, but they're not always two words that I'm going to have to refactor. Right? So I'll create that error and I'll go through that process, but I'm not going to do that right now because we need to get to other stuff. Was this useful as an exercise? This is how I'd like you to code as a dev, and this is especially as a learner. A dev is always learning. You should actually be not only deving this way, but actually learning new things this way. And I didn't apply this. Nobody taught me this. And it only became an aha moment for me after starting Lighthouse. I didn't talk about error-driven development until about a year ago. So I've been teaching with Lighthouse, or created Lighthouse 5 years ago, 5+ years ago, 5.5. And really this like formalization of this concept of causing errors first, and students and developers generally needing to champion errors and not be afraid of them is something that took a while for me to kind of formalize. So I don't know why I mentioned that. I guess things take time. And somebody who's been doing dev for 10 years could still not take this approach and still be a good dev. I'm just saying that this is a good approach that perhaps you should invest time in. Right? It's not the only good approach. It's a good approach. As you get comfortable with a particular language or a framework, you're not going to cause the node index.js causes an error. You're going to skip that step because you're already comfortable with that. Right? But if you're learning something new, like I was learning a new language recently called Crystal, really excited about it. Nobody really knows about it. And I was actually doing these kind of things. And I was like, oh my gosh, like the stuff that I'm teaching the students is actually useful to me in this particular example. Right? In certain fields, this is not so convenient. Right? Astronauts maybe shouldn't be causing errors all the time in order to learn about how to be a good astronaut. I would kind of use that sparingly, right? Or pilots, or people that are dealing like firefighters. You know, like obviously we have the luxury of doing this all the time because our computer doesn't blow up every time we run this. Cause an error, right? Cool. So we'll take a break because it's 41 after, and we'll take let's say a 9-minute break and readjourn at 50 after, and then we're going to start talking about TDD and Mocha and Chai. Are we missing students, by the way? Who are we missing? Yeah, I was going to say the girl with many names is missing. What is her name? Jaden? And Jared? Did they message? What, are they going to be late? Is there anything in? Oh, so I guess we just know about that, or I'll speak with David about that. And then Jared, we're not sure. He was here on Saturday. Also, out of curiosity, many people were here Saturday from this cohort, or only a few? 3 people? It doesn't mean people aren't working. I'm just curious who comes in. A lot of people, it's like inconvenient, right? Like an hour commute, not really worth the time. Yeah. How's it going so far for you, James? Not the lecture, just the weekend. And oh, okay.
Kind of. Yesterday.
Right. But did you not kind of plan to be MIA for that for a few weeks? Is
No,
that
no,
not
I
possible?
did.
Okay. High risk for you, you know, especially in the first few weeks to be doing anything. I'm guessing that was communicated to, but I'm guessing you also communicated back that you'll have to do X, Y.
So I wanted to.
Yeah.
Side of things,
Right.
as well as
Right. Even on the core stuff, you fell a little behind, I'm guessing, or no?
no, no. Well, not entirely. Like there were some days where I.
But then wouldn't you be behind on the day's work potentially? Or?
Yeah, yeah.
Like I'm guessing Friday stuff, have you completed all? Because it's okay. Well, that's
Well,
good.
except for I'm behind on like
Core activities or whatever.
2 core activities. I've done stretch work.
And are you feeling like you're getting the learning outcomes from them, or just completing them but not really feeling
No,
comfortable?
I'm learning. I would say the Friday stuff. At some point. I did it. And did it. Probably not. Anyways, moral of the story, like I'm kind of now like back on. If I'm like 2 days, 3 days in reason, I got tomorrow and something at after. I don't need to.
Yeah. Scan them. Yeah.
Scan them. But at this point,
Yeah. And just, I mean, I'll mention this to the class, but like, it's not like week one is the hardest. Week one is actually, in hindsight, one of the easiest, right? And so this will actually kind of go like this. So expect kind of to add another 20, 30% of stress and extra behindness.
the thing is like in all.
Oh, that's all right. You only asked for help twice? Oh shit, that's not good.
No, but
But didn't you not break the 15-minute rule many times by doing that? Like spending twice as much time on an assignment?
the way that I viewed it is like often when in barriers, I was actually learning because I'm going down the rabbit hole. Like I'm reading about one thing, and I'm spending a lot of time trying to solve the problem.
But I see this sometimes being taken too serious, too much, instead of just-in-time learning, which is like actually being intentionally ignorant.
The thing is, like I was trying to solve problems for exactly.
That's what I mean. Yeah. But if you had asked for feedback, maybe you would have not gone that far. And oh, okay. What happens if I do this? Yeah.
What are the limitations? I realize
Okay.
if I don't walk that line,
Got it. Okay. And so so far successful experiment, but takeaways for week 2, what? Like, are you going to change your behavior a little bit or no? Yeah.
it's like walking into.
At least, yeah. No, like if I see somebody ask for assistance twice in a given day, that's very low. That's a flag. Even if they're a strong student, like who's just crushing it, because that means they're not asking for code reviews. That's my opinion.
Like I have no shame.
Yeah. Well, exactly. It's the mentorship. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, otherwise, like, yeah, people do learn this stuff on their own over a longer period of time. There's content out there. Like, the content isn't the reason you're paying. It's the experience of being in the classroom with other people, and also with the mentors, right?
Yeah. So for last year, or like.
Oh, 10:50. All right, well, we're gonna get ready to resume. It's 50 after. Okay, we'll wait a little bit then.
I think the other biggest thing for me was not walking away. I'm realizing now that I need to walk away after 25 minutes doing stuff. Just take a step up, go do something for 5 minutes. Like a good example, like the test from Friday. I was stuck on number 3 for like 2 hours.
Yeah, it'd get, 2 hours, okay.
It was
2 hours is,
because I knew how to solve the problem.
Yeah, you just kind of get into this like wrong path too long. Yeah.
Nail in my head, and then yeah. Anyways, it took me 15 minutes when I finally
Came back, yeah. You heard me speak about that a little bit, I think, on my first lecture with you guys. Remember?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that one, even though you end up going down that path.
You're not
Yeah.
cognitive of
Yeah.
like, the fact that you're
Yeah. Guys, I want to resume because it's 51 after now. If that's cool with you guys. Got lots to talk about. This is where it gets even more exciting because we get to do more real-world kind of testing instead of just EDD. We're going to get into TDD. We're going to use libraries that are very commonly used. Like likely, if you're getting a job afterwards and you're doing some level of JavaScript, you can't really avoid doing JavaScript these days as a web dev. Even if you're focused on a different language, doing server-side code with Ruby, you're still going to be probably writing a fair bit of Node in JavaScript. It's just Node is embedded in so many other frameworks. It's crazy. Like Microsoft.NET leverages Node. You know what I mean? So it doesn't really mean that you're just working with JavaScript. Anyway, the libraries that we're going to be looking at now, starting with the weekend and today, are very prevalent. And I'll kind of speak to that a little bit more. Let me just close that door. So what we'll be doing is kata number 2 from the prep course, something easy again, because we don't want something too challenging when we're starting to learn this other thing, right? And also to keep the lecture kind of short enough. We're going to be looking at conditional sums. You remember conditional sums, kata number 2 from the prep course? It's a core kata, so I expect that you completed it. Just as a reminder, how it works is like you pass in an array of numbers, right? And then you say even or odd, and then it like sums up the even or odd numbers inside the function. Nothing crazy, nothing complicated. Probably at the time when you were doing this, you're like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. Hopefully at this point, you're like, I could figure out the logic for this, and it's just a matter of crafting the syntax. But we're not just going to jump straight to the solution because we're going to take an EDD type approach, but this time we're actually going to write tests so that we actually end up with a test collection so that when we refactor our code, as we talked about, if we wanted to support more than just evens and odds or something like that, we could do that. We might have to change the test a little bit too, but we have a little bit of that flexibility. So shall we? Shall we work on this? Yeah? So remember, I'm still taking an EDD approach. EDD and TDD can work together in the sense that I want to cause errors even if they're not test errors. They don't have to be Mocha errors. Okay? What does that mean? So I have to create this function, and again, I don't have a file, right? So I could take that approach again, but I've already demonstrated that. So let's skip that one. I also need a test. I'll need Mocha, I'll need Chai, I'll need test file. I don't have any of those. So I could start with that. I could see like, I don't actually know what it means to run a Mocha script against a file that Mocha can't find. What does that look like? I don't know. Actually, I really don't remember that. Literally, I'm not just saying that. So let's see what that looks like. Apparently, I can do something like npm test and the name of the file, right? I haven't set up even npm yet. So what I expect to happen is some kind of complaint about npm not being initialized in this folder. That's my hypothesis. But I don't know what that error looks like. I genuinely don't. Npm test, and then of course I'm going to name the file, but the file doesn't exist, so I'll just come up with a name. In this case, it could be called conditional sum test.js. Something like that, right? I mean, you don't have to give it the file name, but we're going to do it anyway. npm test. I have no idea. Some kind of error. No such file or directory. This is my error. Notice that I guess I knew inherently to skip all this nonsense. Like, what is that going to help me with? But this looks interesting. No such file or directory, and it tried to open back. Not a very friendly error. It's not saying, hey, you got to run npm init here, right? So now if I didn't know what the hell this meant because I'm new to JavaScript, I would have to actually like Google this error because it's not giving me any solution or hint as to what the actual problem is. Because like, I would just think I guess my solution to this, if I didn't Google it, would be what? To create that file. right? So maybe I'll just do that. What the hell does this do? Like, how does npm deal with that? Failed to parse. It must be an actual JSON, not just JavaScript or empty file, I guess. Interesting. Cool. So now I'm confused and probably going to need to Google, right? What kind of JSON? What does it have? So I mean, one of the errors could have been that I don't even have npm installed, right? I'm following something, and so you can get different experiences that way, which is neat, especially when you're learning a new framework or new runtime. So let's go ahead and npm init. After Googling, we realized that we're supposed to npm init, answer yes to a bunch of questions, and -y does that for us, so that's great. And that creates a package.json file. And so we're just going to confirm that that got done. Always confirm the thing that you think happened. Don't trust yourself or the output that you see. As much as possible, confirm. So it looks like this thing got created. And now I should be able to try doing the same thing that I did before. I shouldn't just follow the tutorial to do the next thing, right? The next line of code, which may be to modify that package.json. No, even the tutorial says to do that. I'm going to work even more incrementally. Because my hypothesis personally as an educator, and we're guilty of this as Lighthouse, but we try to do better with some of the new stuff we've created, is that almost every tutorial that's written out there, from a hello world to complicated shit, is all written wrong. Because none of it really focuses on errors first. Right? When a new library, you look at its documentation, it goes run this, then run this, then run this. And all these things will be successful. I would argue that they should say run this and notice this error. Now run this. You're learning a lot more about the library that way, in my opinion. Right? And same with any other tutorial. And we try to do this, you might have noticed with week 1 a little bit. Some of the content gets you to actually experience errors first. We didn't call it error-driven development, but we intentionally try to indirectly instill that philosophy. Anyway, npm test, conditional test. What would you think this will do now that package.json is there? It's OK to be wrong. What's your hypothesis? Yep. It can't find the test file, something like that. It could be that, or it could be that like it also doesn't know what to do with this. Oh, that's what you're talking about? Yeah, OK, I think you're more correct there. So it actually echoes this thing, because if we look in our package.json, that's the thing. So it's a bash command to just echo some string and then exit. So we actually have to modify this to actually work. We Google around, or we look at the tutorial. It talks about, you want to say Mocha here, right? But the thing is, I know in the back of my mind, I haven't even installed Mocha yet. Okay, so I expect this. And I could be wrong about my expectation. Maybe I forgot that. But in my case, I expect that Mocha is not going to be a thing that it's going to be able to run. I could be wrong about this, by the way. I'm just thinking out loud here. It might still run Mocha. Yeah, so actually, it complained that it can't find the command Mocha. Mocha not found. I Google for that, or I look at the tutorial and go, oh, shit, I forgot to follow install Mocha. So I'm going to go ahead and, just for the sake of lecture, I'm not going to go ahead and Google it, but npm install Mocha, right? And I know that I'm supposed to do save dev, which basically means this is not for production code, this is for test code. So please don't, like this is not going to get distributed because this is for running my test. This is for developers. So save it for the developers, not for the end result. So it goes into a slightly different part of the package.json. But it's still a dependency. It's just a dependency for the dev process, not for release, not for production. OK, so it goes and installs it with a bunch of warnings that I don't really care about at this moment. And I noticed that what's changed is dev dependencies now has one property. And the key there is Mocha, and the value there is some kind of version number with a hat at the beginning, which means something special. I could go ahead and Google that or not, whatever. Looks like it's around version 6.14 in my case. And package lock has been updated, not just with Mocha, but a whole bunch of packages, because Mocha itself is dependent on some of these directly or indirectly, right? So package lock is like, oh, we got to lock version 2 of LSID, whatever the hell that is. Because, yeah, and then that requires something else as well, right? Cool. And so now I expect it to run Mocha, but complain that that file doesn't exist, the file that I've specified there. All right, so it complains about that. I'm going to go ahead and create that file. Hopefully I spelled it right. I'm going to run it again, and I expect that to work. Of course I forgot the S. Conditional. I didn't forget the S, for what it's worth. The keyboard just, hold on. Was it, which one was it? Was it this one? Okay, and then now I expect it to work. Mocha doesn't actually need it can work with an empty file, which is an arbitrary decision that Mocha has made, and something we've learned in this we may not have known that, right? So far, so good. What's next? I'm also thinking what's next, actually. What is next? While I'm thinking, anybody want to have a suggestion? Aiden? No, I'm not getting an error. Just to confirm, I'm actually getting it. I'm getting green. Sorry, I didn't show you. I'm not getting an error. I fixed it by changing the name of the file, and in my case at least, it's okay to just say Mocha and not bin modules and all of that. Oh yeah, I think this would fail. I think this will fail because it's actually trying to find a folder called test by default. That's default Mocha behavior. It's a convention. Right? But we won't even create that folder because we'll just do it in the same folder. We'll break that convention a little bit for this example. Yep.
Is there a reason why you maybe multiple different test files inside that test folder? Or different?
The question is, just for recording as well as everybody, why is there a folder? Why not just in the current folder? Yeah. Yes, the answer is hundreds of test files. And by the end of this lecture, I'll actually run the test suite on Mocha. So we'll see, like, let's clone Mocha, and let's run npm test, see what happens. I actually had that set up before lecture, made sure that worked, and it does work. It just takes like 5 minutes to run the test suite, so we won't necessarily do that entire thing. But like, yeah, it's hundreds of files if I was to look at Mocha's test suite for Mocha itself to make sure Mocha is working, right? It's kind of a little bit of a inception where like Mocha is tested with Mocha. Right. Anyway, yeah, that's because of there's just you want to organize them. In fact, there's subfolders. Yeah, so this is working. What's my next step? Test for passing. Yay! And go home. No, of course, I haven't written a single line of code, so clearly I haven't solved anything. I want to do EDD, so I want to cause a failing thing and then work from there, right? So I'm going to need to actually write some test code maybe that fails in order to implement something. Perhaps what I can do is open up that test file and write some Mocha. So I know from having done some tutorials or whatever that I can start doing something like describe and then put whatever I want to describe that I'm testing. This is just for documentation reasons or for readability reasons. I'm going to say I'm going to describe the function, and this is just this is just like convention, and the function will be called conditional sum. And I'm going to have a callback function here. I could say function like that, or I could use arrow functions. Doesn't really matter in this case, since we're not using this in here. And inside my describe, well, I mean, I don't even know what happens if I just have this. So like, let's just run this and see what happens. I'm curious. I'm genuinely curious. Let's go ahead and run that. It detects 0 tests. So a describe is not a test, it seems to me. I've learned something. I mean, fake learned something. Is that cool? So it seems like I need an it, right? It should return an array. No, it should return a number, right? That's a thing that it should do. And this might not be the test that I end up with. This is, again, I'm heading not exactly to my point Z. I'm kind of going a little bit deviation in order to work incrementally. What happens if I do this? Now there's apparently a test there, right? Holy shit, that's dangerous, right? It sounds like I did something really good there. Saying I've implemented a successful test that this function actually does return a number. This is something I don't like about Mocha personally. Like, to me, that should be a failing test because it doesn't have any assertions, right? Or a pending test because it's completely empty. That's probably better. This test is completely unimplemented. Now, as it turns out, I think what you do is you have to kind of be cognizant and mark it as pending. This is just a not important thing for you to learn. You're not here to learn Mocha, but in case you're curious, you can mark things as pending. There's a pending test now. And I think there's multiple ways of doing this. You could keep it as an it, and then maybe call pending, or I don't know. There's just, I don't care. Those are library-specific things. I'm not here to learn about libraries and their specific nuances, right? Enough to get the job done. Mastery comes with practice. Yeah. That's a really good question. I did explain pending, and I won't explain it in too much detail because it's a workflow thing. You might want to actually, some people prefer to create a bunch of tests and mark them as pending, and then slowly implement each one. Just an approach thing. I rarely ever, now what I do end up doing is making business decisions. Oh my gosh, like I need 30 tests for this function. It's just not feasible. I need to release this tomorrow. I'm going to implement 4 functions. I'm going to keep the others as pending, and we'll tackle them a month later, right? Like, and they'll just be pending for any developer to go in and implement. So there's ways of like, it's basically creating your own to-dos in your test suite for later. But I know pending wasn't in my scope of lecture. It's not important right now. But in case you were curious, yeah. So I still don't have an error, right? Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. That's my public key, thankfully, not my private key. What the hell? All right. So, yeah, so we need to, this is to me an error situation because I didn't expect this. I expected it to kind of say, it's not really implemented. So in order to get to the error state, I guess I'm going to say, I need to call conditional sum, right, in the minimum possible way, and I expect back a number, even though that might not be the actual valid test. So here, I'm going to need to assert, right? I'm going to assert that, and based on documentation, I found that assert.equal is the way to do that. Assert.equal, first what you got back, then what you expect, right? So I expect this to be, I don't know, 0. Again, I don't know if that's what I expect, but I'm just writing something to get me further along my solution. Now, the editor is kind of hinting already with what the problems are going to be. So it's a little bit of an easy question, but what do you think the problems will be? Somebody else. I forget your name. Julia? Why don't you tell me what you think the first problem or error will be? There will definitely be errors. Hint is that it's line 4. Because that's the 2 lines we've written so far are only 4 and 5. It's OK to be wrong. Take a guess. No? OK. James?
Where's conditional sum? What is it?
Yeah, like it's not defined anywhere. And in this file, if we can't find conditional sum as a declaration of a variable or something, then JavaScript won't be able to find it either. This is a nice thing about JavaScript. Not true for other languages. But one of the things that makes JavaScript, reading JavaScript easy is that if I can't find this particular call in this file, then it's going to throw an error. So I need to have that defined. So I'm going to need to like go ahead and define conditional sum. Now I could just define it here. Conditional sum equals function. Takes in array. Well, we don't have to take in anything right now. And oh, it should, yeah, we'll just do that. That'll get rid of our first error. Oh, we didn't even witness the error, did we? Let's just witness the error first. Conditional sum is not defined, failing test, right? Then we go ahead and we implement the test, the function, and then we expect, hopefully, we're correct in expecting another error, which is this red underline here. Assert is not defined. Right, so we're going to see that next. Assert is not defined. So we're going to have to define that. Now, we don't want to create our own assert function. So what we want to do is we want to require assert. And we know that there's many different options, but we're going to choose Chai as the library that gives our assertion function to us, instead of using our own or some other one. And we're going to grab the assert function out of the Chai object, okay? Because it has many different properties. We care about the assert one. Let's take a look at Chai first really quickly. I had that open. So Chai, for those of you who've done your weekend work, is a TDD, BDD assertion library for Node. Don't worry too much about what these things mean, but we'll kind of slowly learn those things. It has 3 different main ways of kind of testing. And the most popular is expect. Okay? But we're not going to start with that one because it's a little bit more complicated. We're going to start with the one that's probably maybe not the most popular, but the most fundamental. There's assert in every single library, whether it's Java or .NET or whatever it is. And so we should want to get comfortable with that before we do something a little bit more popular. And even that's arguable. I don't know if it's actually more popular. Anyway, so we're going to view the assert guide. And we see that it's required chai.assert, or you can do that in 2 steps as we are doing. And so let's go ahead and do that. We've got that done. And now assert is no longer underlined. So we expect that to at least not complain about assert not being a function. What we do expect is some kind of, OK, so it's going to use assert, hopefully equal as a thing. And it's going to try and compare the result to 0. However, I know result right now of calling the function is undefined implicitly. And so it'll actually say that undefined is not equal to 0, because it's going to compare those 2. And this is helping us get acquainted with the style of errors that we get. And we did this on Friday, too, even without, or even in the prep course. Even without experiencing Mocha and Chai, you were kind of forced to have to read this kind of output, weren't you? Right? Some of those like exercises in Compass where you have to paste the code, that was running Mocha in your browser. We're using tests that we had written. The programming test that you did on Friday was the same idea. It was running, you could open up those test files, you could even see those tests. You could just say assert true and get 100% on your test. If you knew what you were doing, well, that would be cheating, but you get the idea. And so yeah, that's how that's powered, right? Hopefully nobody did that, right? Nobody, I'm just realizing we should probably confirm. Nobody knew to do that, right? That's the benefit of the first test. Nobody knows about it. Starting this Friday, you could like pass that test in 5 minutes by just commenting out all the test code. Because you know, if it's an empty it's a passing test, apparently. But please don't do that. Please don't do that. You're not doing yourself any favors when you do that, right? So yeah, we're going to get an error, and we already got the error around equal. So expected actual to equal expected. That's the syntax. Right? So you got to get comfortable with that. And if you accidentally reverse these, you are going to confuse yourself. Because what it's now going to say is it expected 0 to equal undefined, which implies that it was expecting undefined. It was expecting 0. Right? So it's important. The order of what you pass in here is important. First the result, and then what you expected the result to be. And then a third is like a friendly message to let the user know, maybe a tip or something on how to solve the problem. Right? This particular is not so useful, but it gives you a little bit more context, right? Obviously, this stands for what's this for, right? Like that's clearly what WTF stands for. So I'm going to need to solve this. So let's go ahead and do that. Right? There's a bunch of things that I'm doing wrong here. First of all, this function shouldn't even be in this file if we want to do it properly with modules. So we're going to do that next. But I just wanted to show that like it could just all be in one file. It doesn't have to be that they're separated. It's just not commonly done this way. Why is it not commonly done this way? It's not a great way to organize code. Why is it not a great way to organize code? You're just going to end up with like giant files. And how do you separate business logic from tests? Because you're not really shipping tests. You're shipping your business logic. Right? But still cool to see that you can do it. And now I expect that to pass because I'm getting the number. But it's not really my test. It should return a number. So I need to assert that it's a number, not assert that it's 0. So I'm going to kind of look at how to do that. Maybe Chai actually talks about that. Under assert, full assert API. Ooh, bunch of cool functions. Is there is number? I know it's not a number. That's confusing. Is string? Is number. Nice. This is why we use Chai. And if we just had an assertion function we needed, we could just write that ourselves. But there's just so many cool other ones. Let's get a library to do that. So assert is number, and then we just do that. I don't imagine that you need to compare it. Let's just take a look. Yep, so it's just a value, and then, of course, the optional message in case it fails. So this should still pass, and it should be a better test. Right, nice. Cool, but, yep.
Can you just go back to the
Documentation? Yep.
Okay. So it takes in the parameters and it defines how you specify how it'll be interpreted with parameters. Like it says like parameter 1, it has to be a number.
Yeah, this is just their style of documentation.
For like if it was something else and it's like let's say there's 2 numbers that are parameters, does it go sequentially? So like the first parameter that's a number would be.
My assumption is yes. The question is like, how do I read this bullet point thing? And the answer is it all is about getting comfortable with the documentation style of that library. Okay. If I look up jQuery's documentation, it will be very different. Yeah, let's actually take a quick look. jQuery get, for example, or jQuery post. You'll do this in week 4. Look at their documentation, right? Like it's saying call post, and then it's saying like passing the URL where you want to post the data, and then like square brackets for optional stuff, which wasn't really how, and like completely different style, completely different metadata. And so it really depends on the library, yeah. It's an unfortunate but perhaps fortunate thing, because it kind of forces you to pay attention versus just have one style. I don't know, you could argue either way. What do I do next? I'm not even close to my solution, but I want to work incrementally. I'm not seeing an error exactly. I'm not seeing red, right? There's many ways I could approach this. I'm not even really thinking straight right now myself, but yeah, go ahead, Renee. Yeah, maybe. It's not really error-driven development, but yeah. Yeah, let's do that. Again, it's okay to like sometimes just be like, I need to just refactor at this point, not fix an error. Remember red, green, refactor? So in this case, I just need to refactor. I just know that I'm building up debt. This is another term I use, by the way, is debt. D-E-B-T. There is actually a term, if you Google technical debt, perhaps write that down as your notes. I'm not going to send it in my notes. But technical debt is a thing, and it's measured by CTOs and by companies, their dev teams. And it's okay to build, there's good debt and there's bad debt, just like with finances. And it's bad to build no debt, and it's bad to build too much debt. And of course, there's types of debt. For example, having a lot of tests is good, but that takes a lot of time and energy. So remember what I talked about pending tests and what I did there as an example? You're potentially building good debt. I need to fix this, but it's not risky. It's low risk. Right? In this case, I know I'm building kind of debt that's going to be painful right off the bat. So I'm going to kind of start to refactor this a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut that so it's in my clipboard, and then I'm going to require a file that doesn't exist yet called conditional sum with an S. Right? Save. I'm going to run it, and I'm going to expect that to fail because that file doesn't exist. Cannot find that module, right? And then I'm going to create that file. And then I'm going to expect another failure because the function's not in there. And so it's going to try and call a function that doesn't exist. Some sort of an error on that front. It doesn't need to be specific. Conditional sum is not a function, right? So I'm going to need to export that function. So I'm going to have const conditional sum equals function. And then I need to export it. I'm still not exporting it, and so my hypothesis is the same error will still be the case. Right? Notice how I'm doing this intentionally, causing errors, and not getting nervous about them. I'm going to export it. Now I could just export this as a function. You don't have to export an object. You can export a function, which I guess is an object. But a better way is actually, well, let's make sure this works. So this will work now. Since the function is being exported and it's being imported here using require, we're good. But I would argue it's better to export an object with multiple function possibilities instead of one function. You're not forcing yourself. And in that case, we're still just exporting the one function. Now, I'm using a ES6 shorthand that you were introduced very quickly, right? Which is the, what is it called? Like object property shorthand notation or some garbage like that. Either way, essentially what I'm saying here is conditional sum, conditional sum. And people were finding themselves repeating this so often that JavaScript's specification, the community, the what are they called? The committee decided that there would be a better way to dry up this code a little bit and support this shorthand notation for objects, where if you say this, this will be both the value as well as the name of the key for the object. Okay. Yep. Adding more is comma, as long as you're comfortable with the key name being the value of the variable that you're passing in. So what it does is it actually forces you to name your variables the same as the keys as well. So it kind of makes things consistent. So I guess that's the conversation that the committee had in some closed room and said, yeah, okay, cool, let's do it. And then signed off on it. And then people had to implement it. Yeah.
I don't know if this is like, yeah. How would you export the whole thing? Like, would there be a case where you want to export literally the whole thing just for testing?
The whole thing being what?
Like all the functions that you're going to be.
You'd list all the functions, which you might argue, well, what if I have 100? Well, then I would ask you, why do you have 100 functions in a file? Right? So it's kind of forcing you to not have 100 functions in a file. Maybe there's a way to loop through all the functions in a given. It's just not something you should be thinking about. Yeah. It's not something I've had to think about. Okay, so now we were exporting an object. So now we expect an error because when I require, I assume I get back a function, but now I'm getting back an object with the function inside. So this is going to say, hey, it's not a function, it's an object. So we need to extract that function from that object on the receiving side. And so in my test, I'm also going to use the shorthand notation to deconstruct. This is called, I think it's called deconstruction. I don't really care what it's called. It's saying, it's not creating an object. It's kind of confusing. It's saying extract this from the object. Right? So it's the equivalent of saying this. It's the equivalent of saying dot conditional sum here, because we're getting the object out here. This is the object being returned. And then dot property. But in ES6, and by the way, that's what we're doing here as well. So I could actually change this to assert equals chai. Right? Extract assert from chai and call the variable assert too, because why not just be consistent there? So shorthand notation, if it's confusing, that's okay. You can spend some more time, but don't let it block you. If you're like, I don't fully understand this, but I know that when I write it, it works, that's okay for now. And then you'll, again, that just-in-time learning of being uncomfortable with certain things and not understanding them fully. Yeah, so we're just going to do that here. You don't have to do it this way. You can do it the old school way if you want. And now we're extracting that property from that object. And again, we have this function that we had already had, and we've moved it into a separate file. We've refactored our code successfully. And now we want to go further. So we know that realistically, it should return a number when it's passed in an array, right? So I'm going to pass in some numbers, and I'm going to say even. This is not going to throw an error, though, unfortunately, because they're going to get ignored. JavaScript just ignores those arguments. So I'm not sure if this was necessarily the best solution or the best next step, because I don't see an error. I call this probably not the best decision, because I have no idea how to test what I just wrote in small steps, right? So sometimes you kind of like go, oh, I need an error in something small that I can quickly fix, but I'm struggling with what that should be. I'm not going to spend hours coming up with that. Okay. So an example of like, it's okay. It's okay that it's like a bad incremental step. Just keep things small. So still passing. And conditional sum is clearly still broken. Right? So we can start writing another test like it should sum the array entirely when no second argument, I just made this up, is present. I don't even know if this is a spec, but I'm going to go ahead because it's simpler. I don't have to worry about a second argument. I just sum the whole thing. I just made a decision that the actual feature I want to implement is going to take more work, but less work is to just look at the first argument, loop through it, sum it, and not even worry about the even odd thing. And then we can add that in later. So now I'm not going to pass in even or odd. I have a separate it, by the way, which is calling it again, maybe same arguments. And I not only do I expect it to be a number, but I've already done that check. So I actually expect that to be equal. And I expect the result to equal what? 10? Is that right? And I would actually say it should be strict equal. Does anybody know the difference between these two? Anybody looked? Strict equal versus equal? What do you think? Take a guess. Yes, exactly. Because if I don't use strict equals, it's kind of another part that sucks in my opinion. I think it should be the opposite. Because you should definitely just be using triple equals for comparison generally. So you have to write more words to do the real check, which is use triple equals, not double equals, because we want to make sure it's 10 number, not the string 10 that comes back. Okay? And now I'm going to expect this to fail. Right? And in order to solve that, I actually have to just do this. Right? Because I want to just solve my errors. Right? Both tests are passing. Now, this is actually forcing me to not assume that the function is working with just one test. It's actually going to be like, no, the developer could either cheat or accidentally not implement the right thing. And our tests do this too. When we test, we don't just test with one value because you could have just hard-coded that value. We test with two to make sure that it actually is dynamic. It changes based on the input. And this is just good because you don't want to trust yourself either. So should sub the array entirely when no second arg is present. Right? I'm not really doing a justice to the string here, just to move on. I would come back and improve the strings a little bit, the description of the example. So here I'm going to just put 5, and I expect that to be 15. And I expect this to fail because it'll say 10 is not equal to 15. Right? Now I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my hard-coded thing and expect both tests to pass. So Aiden, do you have a question or a concern?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, like, or I guess, and maybe I didn't want to ask it because I thought it might be jumping too far ahead. But when you said dynamically, I almost thought that you were going to instead of duplicating that block, you were going to, there was something in Chai that would allow you to have multiple values be passed in if you wanted.
That's actually a really good point that I didn't consider, but I should speak to. It doesn't have to be that this is a separate test. I could have actually, using Chai and Mocha, you're not restricted to just 2 lines or 1 assertion per test. I could actually say, you know what, this is not going to be a separate test because I can't think of like how it's different or whatever. I'm just going to like do the same thing twice in the same test, right? But in the second time, I'm going to pass in 5 and expect 15. And so this one test kind of just makes sure that the stuff is working correctly. Pardon my French. Too casual sometimes. Yeah, so now I'm going to make sure that result 2 is equal to 15. And I'm going to do 2 assertions to make sure that I feel good about that test.
Would you ever have, and maybe this like something dynamic in there where you're literally just like, you're creating an array based on the specifications and then testing that?
Yeah, sometimes it's a little bit more, like this is clearly a very simple example, but sometimes you're actually doing something a little bit more, there's a little bit more setup work to do, right? Instead of just like hard coding an array in there. But what you don't want to be doing is the thought of like dynamic as in like, let me randomly create some values. I mean, you could, but it's a bit unnecessary, right? I don't need this, and I don't need to run this test 6 times. I don't need to loop 6 times and run 6 different things. Maybe 2 or 3 is okay. Right? Because I'm not trying to protect against malicious developers. I'm trying to protect against mistakes, right? Still failing, just now there's only 2 tests because I reduced it, I shared the same code in a second test. So now I need to make this work, and I can start getting to work and implementing my function, right? So instead of returning 10, we need to actually take in, well, first of all, we need to loop, so for const num of numbers, and then just console log the number because I don't want to do the whole solution. I want to work incrementally. I want to make sure my for loop works. Will my for loop work? It will not because I'm making assumptions about what I'm taking in as local variables, and I'm not taking in this thing called nums. It doesn't exist anywhere. It's going to throw an error that nums is undefined, and both my tests should be failing because my function is broken and nums is not defined. I'm going to say that nums is the first argument. I'm going to run this, and now it's not getting back numbers because I don't have a return statement anywhere. I commented it out, but I expect my console logs to be working. And this is a great way to debug, whether it's the programming test on Friday or your own stuff that you're writing. It doesn't mean that you do away with your debugging tactics, like using console log. There's also a way, I forget how it is, but there's a way to like run a specific line of code as well. Mocha run specific test. By line number. Because you can do that in RSpec, which is the Ruby one. I'm going down a rabbit hole that it's not too important. Anyway, you can even use a specific flag in Mocha to say, only run tests that have this word in them in the description. Because you only want to run that one test, because maybe there's 50 tests in there, and they're just causing so much noise that you have to scroll up to see that failing test. You have to scroll up to see your console logs. You just want to like limit how many tests you're running from that one file. Yep. Question?
Just kind of like going off of that. So could you like, using that property, could you throw in like, let's say, comments out tags for tests that are relevant for each other? So let's say you have like 15 tests, and like 5 tests you always want to be running together. So you like would put comments.
Yeah, like a hashtag.
Like some kind of
Yeah.
thing. And
Yeah.
is that like
Yeah, so I've seen that labels or hashtags in the descriptions that can be grepped against, that can be kind of like patterns that are
Are
given.
you talking about like in the string that says like what? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we're not, yeah, that's kind of like
Just
company convention or team convention versus anything that's like kind of a best practice or anything like that. Yeah.
So for TDD or EDD, we're spending a good time constructing our tests before we have to.
Yeah, it's awesome, isn't it? Yeah.
Right.
But we have to.
Okay.
Well, TDD specifically is test-driven development, which implies iterative test-driven development, which implies error-based iterative test-driven development. That is pure TDD. Iterative, meaning small steps. Error-based, write the test first. Make sure the test is failing. And don't write the whole test. Write a small part of the test. Even the test creation is iterative. Yeah, if I actually bring up TDD workflow, and let's go into Google Images, just to kind of, I should have probably prepared that a little bit. It looks kind of like this. I don't like this one. Red-green refactor. You write a failing test. You write just enough code to make the test pass, what we did with EDD. Then you refactor, because you know that you can safely refactor. Once you've got a green, you want to make sure it stays green when you refactor. And specifically, refactor means that you're not changing the behavior. You're just changing how it works. Right? So the implementation, but not the output or the result. Okay, so in this case, I don't have it returning anything that's causing an error. And I'm going to go from there. Expect it to actually return a number. Now I'm going to start with total, or maybe not even start with total, increment total. Expect that to fail with test. It can't, it's not defined. Define total. That's great, but it's still not returning total, so that should result in an error because I'm still returning undefined. I need to actually return total. At this point, I expect both of those tests to pass. So even within a test, I can work incrementally. Is this useful? Somewhat? This will take time, right? This came naturally to me after years of practice. I still don't, again, practice TDD all the time. Sometimes I do write tests at the end, which is kind of a lazy approach. And what it ends up doing, this is the philosophy why people try to promote it, TDD, is it puts tests to the end, which is in our brain saying it's less important, which actually they're more important than the solution itself. There's a lot of people that believe like if you're not writing tests for it, it shouldn't be shipped, shouldn't be put in production. So don't even bother writing it if you don't have time to write tests for it. Okay. So TDD kind of says, no, not only are tests important enough to be first, they're actually shouldn't just be all up front either. Because there's another philosophy called test-first development, which is people conflate it. People think test-first development means test-driven development, but really all it just means is that all the tests are up front. They're already all implemented, and you just got to make them pass. What does that sound like? It sounds like the programming test you tackled. It sounds like the stuff in Compass. That's test-first development. Okay? Some people do this. For example, what they'll do is, and these are just examples, okay? I don't know how popular they are. Company has a whole bunch of offshore developers, and they have, but they have testers as well that are offshore and internal. They know what they want as their software, so they write tests, but they don't write the implementation. And then they say to the offshore team, please make these pass. Here are the tests. And they know that if the tests pass, that they trust at least that at least the thing is working correctly. What they don't trust is maybe the code quality, so they put other measures in place to test the code quality, right? Like code reviews and things of that nature. So there is something called test-first development, but it's not recommended or a common thing. Maybe more in enterprise or something like that. Right? We want to actually leverage tests to change how we think, to change and force us to work incrementally. Cool. I'm not done yet. I know it's 37 after. I wanted to cover a few other things in my notes. So I wanted to make sure I covered them. Yeah, Mocha and Chai in the wild. I wanted to talk about that a little bit, just so you understand the gravity of, you're not just learning some small library that like barely anybody uses. A lot of libraries or products that are built with Node use Mocha and Chai, but it's not the only option. I'll show you some other options before we look at Mocha and Chai again. There's one called Jest. You'll actually learn Jest later in the program. So Jest, let's see how they describe each. Let's see how it describes itself. Nothing too technical. It's a JavaScript testing framework that sounds like Mocha, right? It works with projects including Babel. Don't know what that is. TypeScript. Don't know what that is. I mean, I do, but you don't. Node. Cool. React. Heard of it. Angular. May have heard of it. Vue. May have heard of it. Cool. It works with a lot of these things. Let's see how it works. Oh, I can see like passing tests. Ooh, I see some kind of a fancy table output, which tells me tests are passed, how many have failed, and some kind of a nice little output for it. So it looks like maybe the output's nicer. And then it talks about mocking. Don't need to know what that is. Oh, look at the code. Instead of an it says test, and then it's using expect syntax. You know, it's similar to what we're already doing, right? It's an alternative to Mocha and Chai. You wouldn't likely use both at the same time. There's another one called Jasmine. Quite popular. Not the nicest homepage. But like Jasmine, again, a BDD, overused words in my opinion, testing framework. Works with both Node and the browser. And let's look at their example code. Tell me if this doesn't just look like something that's written in Mocha and Chai, right? Like it is clearly an alternative. And it seems to both give you the assertion function, expect, as well as it and describe out of the box. So it's kind of Mocha and Chai together in one. Right? OK, let's actually look at Mocha on GitHub. GitHub has this new feature that they released, which I really like. It's not an accurate number, but it gives you an extent to how much something is used. This is how many libraries, if I click this, how many other repositories on GitHub actually have a package JSON that refers to Mocha, meaning most likely uses Mocha. That's a lot. It's like almost 1 million. And that's just on GitHub. There's a whole bunch of private repos that are on GitLab, Bitbucket, these alternatives to GitHub. So probably multiple million projects use this. And I think this is just counting public repositories, but I could be wrong. In fact, if I scroll into their documentation, Mocha likes to boast a little bit, but they have a right to. You might want to know that Mocha is the most dependent upon module on NPM, literally the most downloaded or most used. And the source is libraries.io, which is interesting. Let's click on that. Whoops. Let's click on that. And zoom in, and it looks like it's giving an ordered list of libraries that have the most dependence, that are used the most. Number 1 is Mocha. Number 2 is another library that you've used called ESLint. Number 3, you're actually going to learn when you come to React. Number 4, Chai, because Mocha and Chai are often used together. Number 5, you're going to use this. You're going to learn this when you're learning React, along with Babel. This would be cool if we could teach this, but we don't have the time. Highly recommend you look into it. It's a language on top of JavaScript, becoming quite popular. TypeScript, created by Microsoft. Right below that. Pretty cool, eh? I didn't even realize this until I saw it. It was not intentional, but it's in the top 10. Lodash. React is up there. Jest is there. You'll be learning Jest as well as part of it, or learning with Jest, I should say. You're not going to spend that much time with Jest. You're going to be learning React. I think we used Chalk at some point. It's crazy. It's used a lot, apparently. I guess a lot of things when I have an output of green or red or whatever, so there's a lot of libraries that end up using Chalk. You'll be learning Express very soon with TinyApp. So there's a lot of indirectly, we've taught a lot of these most popular libraries in the Node ecosystem, which is pretty cool. Another thing I wanted to show you, just because it's really cool, is I mentioned it earlier, Mocha itself has a test suite. Because any library that you download, that you decide to use, you should check, does it have good tests? Okay. How do I test? How do I check? There's many different ways. Sometimes they'll include badges in the README. Look here, a lot of green color here. Build, passing. Coverage, 92%. What's the license? Things of that nature, right? And even without that, I can look at, is there a test folder? Oh yeah, there is. Like, is it being maintained? Oops, sorry. Looks like it is. It's being updated quite frequently. If we go into the test folder, what's inside? Holy shit, lots of folders. Let's pick one that seems to be one that we should look at. I don't know. Holy crap. What the hell is sanity? Oh, that's like literally not a test. It's just like, does the test thing actually work? Yeah, are things working? I don't know. What am I in? Am I in Mocha? Yeah, I'm in Mocha. Let's look at what the hell is only. TDD spec. Should run .only's test in the TDD. Oh yeah, that's another thing. You can say .only in Mocha, and it will only run that test. Because you remember I said there's a flag to cut out the noise and run only the one that you care about? Well, you can, I think, use .only. And when you run Mocha, it will only run that test in the entire file. So they're testing to make sure only actually works, right? And they've written tests to check that. And you might be wondering, well, they're not using describe and they're not using it. These are synonyms for describe and it. Okay. So you can do that as well. Notice how small and clean each of these is. Right? And notice the syntax is slightly different. They're not using assert, they're using expect. Let's run their test suite. So here I have Mocha already downloaded, npm already installed. That's the first step. But we'll run it again. Hopefully it's fast. Not fast enough. And then we will run npm test because, let me actually not run that. Let's open up the code. Lots of files inside of Mocha library. And we'll open up package.json and see that there's a lot of authors. These are all people that have contributed, I think. They're nice to make sure they're included in here. And under scripts, they have test. So we're going to run that. That's going to be npm test. And now it's running the whole test suite. Now this is a production, one of the most used projects. So you can imagine it has a and it's about testing. So you can imagine that for purposes of demonstration even, they're going to have a very elaborate test suite, right? And you can see the output that's coming out of here, like test passing, 2 pending. Looks like they still have some to-dos in there, right? Should work on Windows is pending. Love it. It's just, yeah, it's going to take a while. And it also ran some linting to make sure that like lint pass as well, just like in our programming test on Friday. While this is running, any questions? Anything that I've covered so far? Yeah, Ryan?
So the flag save dev allows you to separate your workflow from actual release code and versus development code. What happens when sometimes development code becomes release code? Like, is there a merging process, or how does that work?
I see. So the question is, we talked about save dev and separating certain packages or modules that we download from production release. How does that get separated? It really depends on the, this is a pretty large question, I guess, because it really depends on the release process of the particular product, which could be quite different. Some things will release on using like a simple bash script. Some are very intricate and require like all these other tools like Docker or Kubernetes or blah, blah, blah. One of the things that the save dev allows you to do is on production, on the server that's running the app, let's say Tiny App or whatever you implement, when you run npm install, you would say npm install -- production. And what that will do is it will ignore Mocha and Chai from the package JSON. So it will save time as well as memory, as well as hard disk space, as well as all that stuff, because on production, we use a slightly different flag when you run npm install. And that'll basically say ignore anything that's dev only, because it's not meant for dev. This server is not running tests. This server is running the code. So I guess the short answer is npm install -- production or something like that. Yeah.
So then, let's say you're done with development process. Then do you have the same folder if all this, because the code that's working now with the app is tested already, it works.
Yeah.
Release it to production.
That's right.
So do I now run some sort of npm uninstall my old stuff and production?
No, so sorry, I understand the question. This is a little bit out of context for the lecture, I guess out of scope, but I'll answer it anyway. But if you want to ignore, you can ignore. You wouldn't run those commands locally. You'd git clone on the production server. So the production server is its own laptop, not laptop, but its own machine. It git clones. It runs npm install for production, so by the way, git clone would include all the test code, but it would just not care about that stuff. Yeah. Then it would run npm install production, which would install only the right packages, not Mocha and Chai and stuff like that. And then it would go ahead and run npm run or something like that. That would start the server up. Yeah. Wow, my test actually failed, which is interesting. Didn't expect that. So I don't know. There's some stuff here that, it's all the tests passed, but it tried to run some other types of tests that failed. I don't really know. Maybe I need some like dependencies installed or something. But you saw how long that took. Quite long. I didn't time it, but it took quite a while. And I think in summary, we ran almost 400 tests. Or maybe that's just a sub-summary. Nope, that's a sub-summary. There's quite a few in total that were run. And that's what it takes to build, an extensive library, a lot of tests. Anything else that was in my list of things I wanted to show you? We talked about modules. We touched on them. But do you have any questions about modules, since I didn't touch upon them very deeply? It's about extracting stuff into multiple files, right? And then exporting from one, being able to require into the other. And then it's a matter of like your decision making, how you want to separate things. What function should be in one module versus another? That becomes a craft question. How do I craft my software?
So like just extending on that, you look at it as like how relevant is each function to each other, and where the dividing line is.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of have to decide as a team or as an individual what makes sense, what functions are related and therefore could be given a name as a collective, and they're so tightly coupled that they ought to live in one file versus in too many. Because again, both extremes are bad. Everything in one file is bad. All functions in separate files is bad too, because that just becomes a nightmare in terms of.
Like an example of what I think it means, like let's say you are looking at online shopping, having a module of let's say the selection for your shopping cart.
Yeah, I really like where you're going with this. Keep going, yeah.
That would be module, whereas like
Yeah. So maybe there'd be a cart.js that exports a bunch of functions, for your shopping cart.
But like the calculation for it would be maybe another.
Maybe. You could decide, right? Because it depends on how complicated that is. But for example, I can envision a cart.js that exports multiple functions.
Yeah.
One of them is add product,
Yeah.
and it takes in a product. And one of them would be remove product, and it would take in a product, right? And maybe add product and remove product both call certain private functions that are no longer, they don't need to be exported. And so that function or those functions could be inside of cart.js, but only those two are exported, for example. Or increment, decrement, those kind of things, right? But I would argue that something like calculating tax or calculating the totals, I would argue I agree with you, that those should be in a different file, right? You'd maybe have a different file called calculations.js, which actually takes in a cart and or exports functions that take in a cart and give you dollar values back, something of that nature. But I just made arbitrary decisions there based on trying to, again, the whole goal is make this manageable and as obvious as possible to a new developer. Yeah. We didn't really talk about function best practices, so I'll just quickly say there's quite a few readings and stuff that talk about functions best practices. If my function, conditional sum, or my function that was concatenating the names was console logging the name instead of returning it, I would not be able to test the function easily. Because as I call it, it does something to the console log. I get back undefined as a tester. There is ways to get around this, but it becomes hard. You have to do things like stubbing and mocking, which you'll find in the documentation, but they make things harder. So functions that have side effects, like affecting global objects or depending on global objects in the outer scope, or functions that change outer state, like console log, are not good testable functions. And that's why we try to keep functions separated. One that deals with console logging and stuff like that, and one that deals with actually calculating and return values. And we focus our testing on the latter, on these ones that return values, more so than these other ones. Oh, another cool thing I totally forgot to show you. When we looked at the Mocha library, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. These are just like nice to know, not really super important. There's something called coverage, which I forgot to click on. So what's really another cool side effect of writing tests, and you can install a library for code coverage calculations. It'll actually run your tests and then tell you which lines of code you've actually tested. So if you have a bunch of if statements in your function, but you only tested one branch of that if statement, like the happy path, but not the edge case of like, ooh, what if it goes into the else? What about that particular thing? It will actually tell you whether you're testing for that or not. So let's take a look here. This particular service called coveralls tells you the coverage of this particular library, Mocha. For example, it tells us that overall we have 92% coverage. 92% of the lines of code are run by the tests. 8% are not. Okay, that's a really high, amazing coverage. Anywhere from 60 to 80 is great. Okay. Now the number doesn't give you more than just that they are touched. Those lines are run. It doesn't tell you if the tests are written well. It doesn't tell you if all the edge cases are handled. It doesn't tell you anything more than that, but it is still a good metric. Let's dig in a little bit. Let's see which files are not tested well. So if I go in here, where do I click? Let's see here. Oh, look here. This is the whole source code. So I can see 92% coverage on the lib folder. Ooh, it looks like Growl.js, which is a particular piece of source code in here, like a module, only has 73% of the lines that are tested. We click on that as one of the developers working on Mocha, and we know where the det is, where I need to test a little bit more. How or where? Well, we know that these lines here, they're run. They're green. I wonder if it tells you how many times they're run. Where's 181? Oh, yeah, cool. That is the number. So I think that tells you how many times that line was run when you ran the entire test suite. That's pretty cool. It doesn't tell you much still in terms of how well it's tested. But we can see here that this if statement has two branches, right? If it goes into the if or if it doesn't. And it looks like only, I don't know how to read this, but it looks like we went into one of the branches and not the other or something like that. And we never encountered the return false scenario in our test. So I guess that tells me that it always goes into the if and never outside the if. Pretty cool. Products use this because they want to see what features, maybe login is tested well, but sign up isn't tested well. You'd be able to see that in the code. There's a lot of cool tools like this that companies that you hopefully work for afterward, or projects that you hopefully create yourself, will use tools like this to make sure that the quality of code is important. Because again, it's not just about the end result. It's actually about making our lives easier too, so that we can actually maintain that product. And these are examples of that. Questions come up, yeah?
Yeah, so does that mean, so some of those contributors will write the test to check the lines that have never been passing?
Exactly.
Like that?
That's technically debt. That's technical debt, but it's just probably low priority debt because it has really good coverage. But yes, this is technically debt. We just don't know how to quantify it. So maybe it's considered low priority. Can I show you another cool thing about Mocha after the question? Yeah? That's a good question. Mocha does not create it, but an extension to Mocha does. It's called a coverage library. So it actually like uses Mocha's kind of API a little bit to extract some of that information. I don't know which library they're using, but if we look in their package.json, we'll find something about coverage. We can try to quickly take a look. Package.json. It's a big file. I guess they're using the coveralls itself as a library, and then it's also a software as a service. So it has its own library that hooks into Mocha or whichever library you're using and tells you the coverage. And it can actually export as HTML. It can export as JSON, so you can have your own like output for it as well. Oh, another cool thing I want to show about Mocha, and this is not just about Mocha. This is just about open source software. Having good tests allows you to get contributors to quickly contribute to your library because they feel safe that they can make a change, run the whole test suite. Yes, it takes 5-10 minutes. Make sure they didn't break anything, right? But if there's only 50% coverage, they're like, I think I didn't break anything, but I don't really know because half the shit's not tested, right? But what's really cool about libraries like Mocha that have a lot of contributors, as we can see, 400 plus people have contributed changes. They're not part of the core team. They're just people who are like, oh, you have a bug, let me fix that for you. Is you can also take a look at their number of issues. They have 275 open issues. And what's really cool is that they have good labels, like good first issue. They want to onboard people to help. They want new people to come help. So one of the things I like to recommend our students do, and I'll repeat this near the end of the bootcamp, is contribute to open source. Something that even senior developers are often too nervous to do is actually not that hard, nor that it shouldn't be that intimidating. Because certain libraries, not all, or certain products will actually have really good management and will like a good core team that actually labels things well and triages issues and says, you know what, I think this one's a good one for a first timer who doesn't have experience with the whole code base to tackle because it's only touching a small piece of something. So you as a beginner to Mocha and its code base could actually, oh, and it talks about they want to migrate, they want to move away from coveralls to CodeCov, an alternative. So it's like, oh, this is a good one because like, you know, you don't have to really know about Mocha, you just have to like rip out coveralls and switch it with another library. For whatever reason, they want to move away from it, right? And it's a chore, so they want to give it to someone else. You know, so they have their own labels that they've defined, and it allows them to, and us to contribute to this stuff easily. Anyway, it's a bit too early to be like promoting it, but I wanted to kind of plant the seed, and then we'll revisit. In fact, one of the stretch projects, right? There's like 3 or 4 stretch projects that we've created. The last one is actually, if you have the time during bootcamp or afterward, is to contribute to open source, and we kind of walk you through how to do that comfortably. Okay, a lot said, and it's 12 o'clock on the dot, and I said a lot, so I apologize. How are we feeling? Any last questions or thoughts or comments or complaints? Too many new terms from me, like jargon, too much technical jargon? You know what? Let's do a quick review of the terms that are important for just a minute or two, because I like that answer. I like that concern. So we talked about EDD, which I kind of conjured. It's not even a really, you know, it's just a philosophy. We talked about TDD. I'm not expecting you to do TDD today. So this is more of like, you should know what TDD is. You should understand that it's a holy grail that you should try and pursue. But you know, we're not going to force you to do TDD today. Okay? So don't worry if you're not fully comfortable with it. We talked about unit testing, at least directly, which is to test a small unit or a function. behavior. I don't know if we talked about it, but this is a common thing that comes up. We talked about modules and NPM, of course. Later on, we talked about coverage, which is like a % of your code that is tested. We talked about assertion versus expectation, which is just different syntax for asserting, right? And we're just focusing on the former, assert. We talked about Mocha and Chai, which are 2 different libraries. Mocha is the testing framework, which gives us describe, it, the Mocha command itself. We talked about Chai, which gives us assert or expect, and all the things that are inside of it, right? Things like that. Sorry, I should zoom in a little bit more. What else did we talk about? I think that's the majority of it. Is there anything I missed? No. Okay, I will leave it there. I'll send out notes in the next half hour. And enjoy the rest of your day. There will be mentors in today. Normal kind of schedule. Up until 9. And yeah, enjoy your holiday. Cheers. Yep. Oh yes, that's the other thing I forgot to mention. You are doing pair programming today, and your pair should already be in Slack. David would have already sent them out, and he's confirming that he has. So please relocate and sit with your pairs and go through that process together. It will be a little bit rough at first because it's your new time. It's your first time doing that. We've given you some tips, so hopefully that helps. It'll be in your student Slack channel. Oh, he's sending it out right now.